Hey everybody, this is Mrs. Pender, and today you are going to be taking notes on theme and conflict. So go ahead and pause the video. You are going to set up your Cornell notes so that they follow this template here. This is what your notes should look like when you're done. And up at the top, you're going to write our essential question. What is the difference between the conflict of a narrative and the theme? Go ahead and pause your video, and when you're ready to move forward, click play. Now, the theme is the central message, concern, or insight into life that is expressed through a literary work. This can be expressed by one or two sentence statement about human beings or about life. It could be stated directly or implied, and your interpretation of the story uncovers the theme. Now, this definition is pretty good, but it can be a little complicated. So let's talk about what we actually mean. Now, when we're talking about a theme, it is the lesson that the author tries to teach the audience about life. It's always a complete sentence. So things like love, family, good versus evil, friendship, these are topics, but they're not quite themes yet, because a theme needs to be a complete sentence and a whole message. So for example, if the topic of the story is courage, the theme might be that it takes courage to do the right thing. The topic of the text might be love, but the theme might be it's better to love than hate. Okay, so this is the difference between a topic and a theme. Our next definition is conflict. Now, this is in particular literary conflict. This isn't the conflict, the fight you have with your younger sibling. In a story, the conflict is the struggle between two opposing forces. The conflict is the plot of the story. Without conflict, you don't have a story. It's just things that happened. And conflict in literature sets a protagonist against an antagonist. And we talked about this last week in our characterization notes. Protagonists are the main characters, and the antagonists are any force that are opposing the protagonist. So we have Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort here. There are four types of literary conflict. There's man versus man nature, man versus himself, and man versus society. Man versus man conflict sets up a protagonist against a human or human-like antagonist. This also includes conflicts against supernatural or fantasy beings that are human-like. So we have a lot of stories about heroes and monsters. This would still be a man versus man conflict. And an animal versus an animal if your protagonist is an animal. So something like Lion King would still be man versus man, even though it's technically lion versus lion. Man versus nature sets the protagonist or the main character of the story against a force of nature. So a hurricane, or maybe a fire, or maybe snow or an avalanche, maybe a drought. Man versus nature can also be living things from nature if they're not human-like characters of the story. So a surfer versus a shark, but not a shark versus a fish. Man versus society sets the protagonist against the elements of a government or culture. So this is a screenshot from The Hunger Games. Katniss is the protagonist, and she is setting out against her corrupt society. It's a struggle against a whole culture, the way that things are. And lastly, the man versus self conflict sets the protagonist against himself or herself. This is internal conflict, and it happens all inside the character's mind. Making a decision or overcoming guilt, sadness, or fear are all examples of man versus self conflict. Okay, and that's going to be the end of our Cornell notes.